Okay, let's take a look at our next classical civilization, and that's going to be the Roman Republic. And we're going to see that when we study ancient Rome, that it's actually going to cover not just the Republic, but also all the way into the Empire. So we're going to start off here with the Roman Republic phase of Roman history. Okay, let's start off with the definition of a republic. What is a republic? Well, a republic is a form of government in which power rests with citizens who have the right to vote for their leaders. This is very similar to the type of government that we have. We like to think of ourselves living in a democracy, but it's really a democratic republic. In ancient Rome, the idea of SPQR, which were the Latin letters for the following phrase,
Senatus Populusque Romanus.
basically meant the Senate and the people of Rome. So this is the type of government that we trace our heritage back to. So we basically inherited a republican form of government from ancient Rome. All right, let's take a look at this map and get a pretty good idea of what ancient Rome might have looked like. Now, if we go back to about 265 BC, we can see right here that Rome basically was constituted around the city of Rome, but eventually grew to encompass what we would call the Italian peninsula. All right, so over time, Rome grew. The Roman Republic back in 265 was essentially the Italian peninsula, but over time, as Rome became an empire, by about AD 117, you can see that Rome basically encompassed this larger area, which we would today call the Mediterranean world. Okay, so most of what we consider to be sort of Western Europe, North Africa, and even parts of what we would call the Middle East today, Turkey, Egypt, places where like Jerusalem are located at, were all eventually incorporated into the Roman world. Now we're going to take a look at one specific topic, and that's going to be the topic of the social classes. We're going to look at the difference between patricians and plebeians, the two major groups living in ancient Rome. So let's start off with patricians. First of all, they were wealthy landowners who held most of the power. They inherited their power and their social status, so it was passed from one generation to the next. They claimed that their ancestry gave them the authority to make laws for Rome. So the patricians were the upper class. They were wealthy, they were powerful. It was an inherited status, an inherited wealth, and because of that long inheritance over generations, it basically gave them the idea that they were somehow privileged to be able to be in power and make the laws for Roman society. The plebeians, on the other hand, were the opposite end of the social spectrum. Okay, they tended to be the common farmers, artisans, and merchants who made up the majority of the population. So again, the minority of the population were patricians, and the majority of the population were plebeians. The plebeians were the citizens of Rome with the right to vote. They were also barred by law from holding most important government positions. So even though they had the right to vote, because they were plebeians, they originally were not allowed to hold major government jobs. Those were reserved for the patrician class. Now, over time, Roman law changed. In fact, the 12 Tables is the system of law that we need to look at. Patrician officials often interpreted the unwritten law to suit themselves. And this is the problem with unwritten laws. If you don't write them down, then people can interpret them any way that they want. Eventually, the plebeians forced the creation of a written law code. Doing so allowed them to have laws that they could actually see and understand, that as a result of being written down could not be reinterpreted by patricians to be whatever type of law patricians would like to impose on plebeians. So this is a safety mechanism for any legal society. You must have written laws that people can know and understand. Now in 451 BC, those laws were carved on 12 tablets or tables, and then they were hung in the Forum being the center of government life in the city of Rome. And as a result of that, people would know what the laws were, and including patricians and plebeians, and could then ask for justice and uphold their rights according to the laws that everybody was familiar with because they were publicly displayed where everybody could see. This is interestingly because it's very similar to what we saw with Hammurabi's law code in Mesopotamia. In ancient Babylon, they carved the laws onto a stone stele and placed them in the middle of the city where everybody could see them. So Rome is continuing this tradition. Now let's take a look at what the 5 common principles of those 12 tables are. Number 1, people of the same status are equal before the law. Number 2, an accused person is presumed innocent until proven guilty. Number 3, the accused should be allowed to face his or her accuser and defend against the charge. Number 4, guilt must be established clearer than daylight through evidence. And number 5, decisions should be based on fairness, allowing judges to interpret the law. What I want you to think about when you look at these 5 common principles is which types of these principles do we have today in the United States of America? Because we share many of these common principles from ancient Roman legal system, but not all of them. Some of them are a little bit different. So I want you to think about which ones may be similar and which ones may be different. Alright, the last page we want to take a look at here is this chart that compares Republican types of governments. You can see that on the left is Rome, and on the right is United States of America. And what I want you to be able to do is compare the executive, legislative, judicial, the legal code, and the citizenship requirements of both societies. Again, Rome was the ancient civilization by which the United States inherited most of its Republican types of ideas, in particular things in terms of how we run government, how we establish our legal system, and of course what our ideas about citizenship are like. They're not exactly the same, so make sure you pay attention to what are the similarities and what are the differences. And then later in class and later on in our test, you're going to be assessed on whether you know and can identify the differences between the two. So make sure you spend some time looking at this chart. And this chart is also in your textbook, and it can also be found in your journal so that you can review it there as well, offline if you need to. Okay, that's it.